One of the auxiliary qualities of talented thinking is an ability of controlling one's own associative imagination. It is the skill of building and developing an analogy. Let's see what role analogies played in culture. The ancient Greek philosopher Leucippus, followed by Democritus, considered the world being made of tiny invisible particles, atoms. Hildegard of Bingen, an educated nun from 12th century, developed an interesting model of the planetary movement. She claimed that four winds caused the movement of the sky. They didn't only support and rotate the vault of heaven, but also maintain order in the universe, preventing chaotic movement of the four elements. Many things that the ancient Greeks were able to observe appeared to be composed of small parts or very small pieces, such as sand. Why couldn't the rest of the world consist of some even smaller particles? That is, Leucippus came up with his hypothesis by finding an analogy among the known phenomena. The system of the world, consisting of four parts, was known long before Hildegard von Bingen. The four corners of the earth, four rivers of paradise, four natural elements were used to explain the essence of the world. The fact that the wind can move objects, sometimes even larger ones, was too quite well known. By analogy with these well-known concepts, Hildegard von Bingen constructed her model of the universe. In the late 19th, early 20th century, people already knew about electrons, tiny particles of electricity. There were also theories about atoms and their internal structure. And people also believed that electricity moved through bodies because electrons could tear themselves from atoms. And Thomson proposed a model of the atom known as the plum pudding model. Electrons were pictured to be embedded in the atomic nucleus like plums in pudding. Again, the analogy was the way of explanation. But it was not clear how electrons could break away from the nucleus. And then Nagaoka proposed a model in which electrons were circling around the nucleus like the rings of Saturn. The analogy tool was used here again. Analogies are not unique to science. Leonardo da Vinci's painting, The Lady with an Ermine, shows a known aristocrat, Cecilia Gallerani. She was a beautiful and well-educated woman with a hideous character. To show this without compromising her beauty, Leonardo painted her with an ermine in her hands. The pose of the animal resembles one of the woman's. At that time, keeping an ermine as a pet was in fashion. Everybody knew how mean and aggressive these animals were. Here we can see the use of analogy again. Association, seeing an analogy, is not an innate quality, but the result of acculturation and learning. One can compare to something that is known. Therefore, the prehistoric interpretation of nature boiled down to comparisons with human body. The book called The Image of the World, popular in the Middle Ages, pictured the earth as being covered by water channels similar to blood vessels in the human body. Wherever and whenever people started digging the ground, they would certainly come across water. Through these channels and via the air, the Earth's constant circulation of water between oceans or on the surface of the Earth was believed to be maintained. Copernicus, while proving the correctness of his heliocentric model of the world, wrote that the sun, like a royalty, sits on the royal throne and manages the family of stars revolving around. We now have many more objects for comparisons. We keep an incredible array of knowledge in our heads. The only trouble is that this information is stored in our heads like an unsorted heap of concepts. But how one can get exactly what one needs? Our mechanism of association comes to the rescue. It lies in the foundation of analogous thinking. If we recall an object, it also activates not only a group of neurons associated with this object, but other groups that store information about other entities. To develop talented thinking, we need to try generating more associations to ensure that their formation is manageable. For example, upon hearing the word apple, one might get associations not only with pears, but with planets, ball bearings, and so on. We must learn how to generate associations by will. Let's practice right now. I'll give you a word and you tell me what associations you get right away. Do not hesitate to say what first comes to mind. Here's how it might look. Apple,
melon,
boots,
rain,
carrot,
rabbit,
turkey.
sandwich.
Okay, now try it yourself. Coffee, butter, cigarette, mango. Okay, now a different exercise. Try to name 5 associations for every word you hear. It will look like that. Pumpkin,
Ghost, basement, darkness, mice, dust.
Okay, and now try it yourself. Ready? Go. Scissors, as you can see, associations may have a closer or remote connection to the original word, but somehow they form a certain range of concepts. Is it possible to break out of this circle or to dramatically expand it? You can, if you're equipped with a systemic association imagination. For training, one can take an object, for example a chair, and try to name as many its properties and functions as possible. You can now do another exercise. Select an object. Name its property or function. Name its anti-property or anti-function. Analogy is an association of objects or phenomena grouped by one parameter or parameters. The more parameters of objects we can see, the more associations we are able to notice. The more manageable our associative imagination, the more inventive our way of thinking can become. In the middle of the 19th century, Louis Pasteur proved that fermentation is caused by microorganisms. Surgeon Lister saw an analogy between fermentation and festering of wounds, and he developed a system of wound treatment that kills microorganisms. Postoperative mortality plummeted. A successful analogy is used for explaining other objects and phenomena. Then we try to extend the analogy, transferring it to different aspects of the phenomenon, different subsystems, and even on a part of the whole supersystem. Rutherford proposed the planetary atomic model: electrons orbit the nucleus like planets around the Sun. But later, to explain some of the properties of the electron, its analogy with the planet was extended by the assumption that electrons spin around their axis. This phenomenon is called the spin. After a series of changes, the analogy becomes completely unrecognizable, complex, and confusing. It is almost impossible to use. One begins to understand that the old analogy should be simply discarded and replaced with a new one. Copernicus changed his model of the universe, claiming that the Sun and the planets do not revolve around the Earth, but the Earth and the planets revolve around the Sun. Leonardo da Vinci stopped using background outline in his paintings, and Goya later abandoned it even in the foreground. We have just looked at only 2 of the 18 qualities of talented thinking. But even with these 2, one can conclude that features of talented thinking are not inborn and achievable for everybody. Anybody can learn to be inventive and talented if one wants to and makes considerable efforts to become an inventor. And you can do it if you try. Thank you for your attention and good luck.